Nights at Freddy's, a game series I care about much more than you'd think when you consider I've literally never played any of them, even the free ones. With that said, let me tell you about my favorites from a viewer's standpoint. Hey everyone, I'm Shadow, and today I'll be counting down my top 10 FNAF games, even though I haven't played any of them. Generally speaking, I'll be basing these off of story, how enjoyable they are to watch, my perceptions about the gameplay from what I've seen watching people play them, stuff like that. It's a fairly simple premise, so maybe we should just get into it. Starting off at number 10 is by far the weirdest game in this series, FNAF World. FNAF World is an RPG that came out in 2016, and honestly, it's only really this low because I just wasn't exposed to it as much as the other games. One thing you gotta understand is that Mark was my main source of FNAF content, and he didn't play the game. So what little I got of this game was from the brief mentions from Game Theory, and more recently the challenge runs Astral Spiff has done. What I can say about the game is that it looks... The main overworld looks fine, but the deeper glitched overworlds just hurt to look at. And maybe it isn't as bad when you're actually playing it yourself instead of watching a YouTube video of it, but it's something I noticed. As for the combat of the game, I think it looks passable? It's kinda hard to follow at times in videos, but I think it takes a sort of Final Fantasy approach where everyone has their own timers until they can act again? I know for sure, but the only info about the game that the wiki has is some random tips. Now, I would be interested to try it out, but I have the feeling that actually playing it is going to end up disappointing. I mean, considering how many RPGs I play. Like Trails of Cold Steel 2, which is currently being uploaded to my channel basically daily. Sorry. Story-wise, it's very confusing because back in the day it felt like everyone ignored it, but now there's people looking back at it and trying to pull from it, so it's kinda hard to have an opinion on it. Ultimate Custom Night exists, I guess. That's it. Okay, no, I have a bit more. So, what I do like about Ultimate Custom Night is all the fascinating voice lines the animatronics have after you die to them. The one you should not have killed, Chica seeing everything, Mr. Hippo's trollishly long rambles. They're all really interesting. However, with the amount of different theory channels I watch, it feels like there's a lot of questions that are still up in the air about a lot of these lines. Was Chica the literal first death? Or just the first death of the missing children's incident? Who exactly is the one you shouldn't have killed? What the heck do all the bonus cutscenes mean? Basically, it just feels extremely unsatisfying for someone like me, who has primarily been invested in this series because of the story. Like a bunch of puzzle pieces that haven't been fit properly into the puzzle yet. And the gameplay itself is just okay. 50/20 mode is definitely an accomplishment for those who can beat it, but so much is going on that it's hard to follow exactly what they're doing. And as someone who doesn't find the idea of the sit and survive style that appealing, it's a game that I just don't really have an interest in picking up myself. November of 2014 was a simpler time. We got a second Five Nights at Freddy's game and me and my friends were hyped. My friends because they liked horror games. Me because I like to watch the funny YouTube man. I don't remember a ton about what I was thinking when FNAF 2 came out. Heck, I can hardly remember my thoughts on games that came out within the past year. But I do remember that I found it super cool that the game was actually a prequel. All the hints at the story overall, and the more hectic nights due to the puppet and all the different animatronics. However, in recent years, I feel like this one hasn't held up quite as well as some of the others in the series. And it just isn't quite as interesting to watch anymore. I feel like the animatronic designs are some of the weaker in the series, T-posing Chica and the toy animatronics especially. I still appreciate what this game set up in terms of groundwork for the rest of the series, I just view a lot of the other games a bit more fondly. I came up with this idea on a whim, but as I'm working on it, I had a realization that, well, this is going to be harder to make than I thought. Lots of tough competition. I say this because I worry that some of my choices may be a bit controversial, like FNAF 3 being here. FNAF 3, the one-on-one showdown between you and Springtrap. First off, I love the story bits within the game. Learning about how William Afton, even though we didn't have that name yet, became Springtrap, Happiest Day, all that stuff. It was all super cool to see game theory pieced together. The game itself strikes a good visual style with the haunted house museum type look, though in hindsight the Springtrap jump scare is a bit weak. Like, look at him just swagger up. The shadow animatronics have no chill though. I do also feel the repairing mechanics would totally overwhelm me, so I don't think I'd enjoy playing this game. Honestly, the game is only this low because I feel like a lot of the other games left more of an impact on me. Speaking of impact, Scott, what's in the box? FNAF 4, the first game to change up the gameplay in the series, dropping the cameras and requiring you to rely heavily on your hearing, priming you for the scares to be that much more effective. And effective they were. I remember hating watching Mark play this game because the jump scares just got me so much. Visually, the nightmare animatronics were fantastic at the time, and while I may have gotten a little desensitized to them after all these years, they can still get to me at times. Plus, there's just something extra unsettling about this taking place in a child's bedroom. Like, I have a bedroom. That could be me! Then there's the wild story that brought so much of what the fanbase knew into question. The bite that might have been of the 87 or 83 flavors, Dream Theory, Psychic Friend Fredbear, Mike is Crying Child, the frickin' box! There were just so many questions to chew on. Theorists could really sink their teeth into this game. Is that enough bite or teeth jokes?
You can do better. In fact, I demand it.
Okay. Right. Even today, theorists are brushing up on the facts just to see what they missed. Some even bit off more than they could chew. They just crunch and munch and chew and
Shadow?
And
oh God,
and
he's gonna blow!
and
Get down!
I'm sorry. FNAF 1 was 9 years ago? Oh my gosh, I feel old. So, FNAF 1. Looking back, it's actually quite simple. Just you versus 4 animatronics, a couple of newspapers hinting at what happened, and the mysterious Golden Freddy. That was about it. But there's something interesting in that simplicity. The gameplay speaks for itself, being surprisingly horrifying while not being quite so overwhelming compared to some of the games to come later down the line. Meanwhile, the story is there enough to get you interested, but isn't muddied by the incessant need for lore. It just lets the concept speak for itself. And also a ton of the visuals are just still terrifying to this day. Another thing that always makes me look back on this fondly is like, I think FNAF 1 might have indirectly set me on the path of Let's Playing that I'm on. Basically, back in 2014, I had made a little bit of content, but not very seriously. No full series or anything like that. At the time, I think I mostly watched Minecraft YouTubers like Ant Venom, Sky Does Minecraft, Captain Sparkles, you know the kind. But when FNAF came out, I wanted to check it out, but wasn't brave enough to play it myself. That's when I discovered Markiplier. From there, I gradually expanded my viewing. Jacksepticeye, Chugga Conroy, all sorts of people. Many of which I can't even remember because I just ended up moving on from them. Anyway, my point is, that sort of sparked an interest in doing Let's Plays for myself. In fact, I'd start my first one in November of that year, and I've been doing them ever since. To varying success, but I don't know if any of that would have happened quite the same if not for FNAF starting me on the Markiplier train. And for that, I'll always be thankful. But please stop staring at me with those creepy eyes. This is probably going to be the most controversial of these entries, so it's time to get on my soapbox and talk about Sister Location. Sister Location is the 6th game in the series, if you count FNAF World, following the rough reception that FNAF World got. And honestly, I think it's great. The expanded focus on story is one of my favorite parts. Getting to know more about Springtrap, revealing that he is indeed William Afton like the books had said, Baby manipulating us, entered as a whole, it's all so cool. I know I just mentioned that FNAF 1 was cool because of the simplicity of the story, but Sister Location actually feels cool for the exact opposite reason. It gives us a ton to look at and to consider. Personally, I really like sci-fi or science-y type stories, so getting some explanation on how and why things were happening was amazing at the time. The gameplay itself I also think is pretty good, and it gets a lot more flack than it should. Right from the get-go, you know that the game is a lot more story-focused, and that it's breaking the known FNAF formula. So honestly, holding it to the standards of the other games kind of fails because, they're trying to achieve different things. Crawling through the rooms trying to avoid Ballore and Funtime Foxy is terrifying, the Biddy Bab and Funtime Freddy sections are stressful, the only real section I can fault is Night 4 because it still seems really stressful and not fun, even knowing it was patched to make it easier. I just think that as a whole, the game accomplishes its goal well. It adds on to the established story of the games and gives fans more lore to chew on while keeping it in a game form so it's clear that it's canon. It didn't try to match the other games, and I don't think it needed to. It just does its own thing, and honestly, I'm proud of it. Good on you, Sister Location. Also Exotic Butters. In the last entry, the emphasis was on that it was probably the most controversial entry. This is why.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, Fazbear Entertainment would like you to put your hands together for the one, the only, Freddy Fazbear.
Security Breach is the newest FNAF game, and boy, there's a lot of opinions about it. It takes the series from being the sit and survive style it's known for to a 3D exploration and objective-based game. While you could argue how successful that transition was, personally, the change actually makes it the game that I'd be most interested in playing, since there's more control given to the player, which in turn tricks my brain into believing that I'm less likely to get scared. Honestly, I love the visuals from just a game standpoint. The character designs are wonderful, the Pizzaplex looks great, and personally I still think there's quite a bit of horror to be found even when the game looks like this. On my first couple watches of people playing this game, I definitely found myself tensing up during certain sequences and jumping at most of the jump scares. I do think that the story is definitely the weakest aspect of the game. There's a lot that just doesn't make sense, and it feels very apparent that things were cut or changed during development without much regard to the full picture. There has been several revelations and stuff during the Tales from the Pizzaplex books that I feel are really interesting, but they should have been more tied into the actual game itself instead of relying on books that came out 2 years later. Regardless, the game just seems like a lot of fun despite the lack of polish, which I can honestly look past because some of my favorite games are a bit jank themselves. So that's why I put it up here, because of all the games, this is one that I think I'd actually have the most fun with. I hate this man. His smug aura mocks me. FNAF Help Wanted, the VR game that recreated several of the older games. First off, the VR makes this game feel so much cooler. Seeing all these locations and all the characters in full 3D just makes it feel so much more real and intense. Honestly, why I'll probably never play the game myself, but it makes it really fun to watch others play it. The games seem to be recreated well, and the new segments like the maintenance and stuff like that are also really cool ideas that were well executed. The story as well is super cool. With it being unclear if the game was retconning the past or not, at least at the time, and Glitchtrap as a whole. This freaky rabbit, I hate him so much in the best possible way. He's just so creepy, and the concept is an amazingly horrifying idea. Back when the game first came out, this guy literally stuck in my brain. I genuinely had trouble sleeping because of this ugly mug. There's just something so effective about him. Even if I think they haven't necessarily followed through on the setup well. But maybe we can go into that some other time. By process of elimination, you can probably already tell that at the top of this list is FNAF 6, Pizzeria Simulator. So there goes the surprise, I guess. To start off, why don't we talk about the gameplay, because that's not the reason this game is up here. The simulator aspect, I just love. It's cool to see people put their own pizzerias together, and the minigames involved are all really cool, and oftentimes funny. The salvage minigames, while sort of simple in hindsight, were incredible on release, as it put my favorite creators up close and personal with the animatronics. The Survive the Night segments are honestly the worst bit, being a fairly repetitive segment that isn't very visually interesting to watch, which is very important to me as a viewer. However, that doesn't lose it too many points because, a lot of the games can end up like that by the time you get to the later nights. I love the animatronic designs, except for Scrap Trap, which looks just a little too goofy. The contrast between the Tycoon stage and the Survival stage is fantastic, with the former being bright and energetic, and the latter being dark and dingy. But honestly, there's only one reason I'd put this at number 1.
Connection terminated. I'm sorry to interrupt you, Elizabeth, if you still even remember that name. But I'm afraid you've been misinformed. You are not here to receive a gift, nor have you been called here by the individual you assume, although you have indeed been called.
The story elements that this game introduced are just fantastic. The final cutscene in particular is obviously a standout, with an amazing performance by Henry's voice actor delivering some of the best lines in the entire series. But that's not all. The insanity ending, which gives insight into what Lefty is and Henry's motivations, the minigames, which give us all sorts of things to chew on, all of it is just amazing. It was the perfect finale to the story that was being told, and as a viewer, I couldn't have been more hyped. Too bad the sequels reduced a lot of the impact. Oh well, can't win them all, I guess. Well, that's all I've got. I hope you all enjoyed my somewhat disorganized thoughts on how I'd rank the Five Nights at Freddy's games, even though I've never played any of them. If you enjoyed, feel free to leave a comment down below, or maybe leave a like. Maybe if this can reach 1,000 likes, I'll play Security Breach. Heck, 10,000 and I'll attempt to play the entire series. But that's all I've got, so I've been Shadow, and I'll see you later. Bye!